This type of promotion is probably one of the hardest promotions to run because there's a lot of moving parts and it's not just set and forget. If you are running an up to X% off sale, let us say up to 50% off, you're probably going to end up driving customers to a collection page where they can then see a variety of products that are either 50% off, maybe 30% off, maybe 10% off. You want to make sure that on that first page of the collection page, you have one highly discounted item, 50% off in this scenario, every 1 to 2 lines to make sure that customers feel like there are those 50% off offers on the site.
Yo, what's happening? Episode 4 of the Ecom Scaling Show. What's up, Dylan?
Not much, not much. How about you?
Just coming off a great weekend. It's warming up out here in the great state of Texas. How is the weather out there in Canada right now?
Toronto is finally getting warmer. It's like today is not quite summer weather, but it's like actually going to be one of the first days that is closest to summer weather. So I will have to
Yes.
make my way outside at some point to not freeze for once.
It's beautiful. It's a beautiful seasonal change, and it's a
It
beautiful day
is.
to chat about merchandising your ad account and how that connects to cash flow planning. So let's dive right in. I want to start by getting your definition of merchandising and even more specifically, merchandising your ad account. I think there's inconsistent understanding out there of what this means. Lay it on us.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say that like I would break it down between like product, price, and placement across like how you promote your products. So A, when and where you choose to promote a specific product. I guess that kind of gets into product and placement in one. And then the pricing strategies you use to kind of dictate where you want your demand to go. Another way of putting it is like, how do you kind of funnel demand in a specific direction to try to manipulate sell through of specific items? And that can be done via some of the things I just described, mixed with how you actually structure your offers. So yeah, that's how I would describe it and think about it at a high level. How about yourself?
Yeah, I love that. Agreed. And I think that I don't know. You can tell me if I'm being unfair here, but what I oftentimes see with 7 and 8 figure brands is that they hire an agency and they just like kind of assume that the right buttons will get pressed to optimize things. And certainly there's low hanging fruit for how ad accounts are set up and how to think about like bidding strategy and stuff. But I think what you laid out here is quite a bit more important, or at least it can't be separated from the more tactical advertising strategy, which is what is the strategy around your product, your pricing, and your placement. Because at the end of the day, almost always, or maybe actually always, when there's an issue with returns on ad spend or just returns on ad dollars, usually there's an upstream problem. It's not necessarily the ad buying. It could be, but once you fix that, if there's still a problem, it's always upstream in your overall strategy. So I think this is a great place to chat. And I would say furthermore, the reason I'm really interested in us to getting into this topic is because I've seen it done wrong or poorly many times where ultimately the outcome is not actually funneling demand in a specific direction. And it actually ends up being a bigger detriment to the bottom line than an enhancement to the bottom line or the balance sheet, which we'll get to in a second. But next, I'm curious from your perspective, what are kind of some of the most common scenarios in which you bring up this merchandising strategy? What situations do the brands have themselves in, or what's the most common scenario in which you go, hey guys, we really need to think about product, price, placement strategy if we really want to funnel demand in a specific direction?
Yeah, so there's like on site and then there's also the ad account. Most frequently, we're spending the majority of our time thinking about the ad account, but sometimes a specific funnel in the ad account will actually impact how something should be kind of structured on the site side. I think that merchandising is generally a bigger priority for like higher SKU count stores, just because you have more flexibility and levers to pull, so to speak, and or just a bigger need to try and optimize your sell through in specific areas. So one that comes to mind is like a lot of stores will opt to run something like an up to X% off sale. And the reason why is if you have a ton of SKUs, this is common in clothing and apparel. If you give like just a blanket 30% off across your entire store, there's probably a lot of SKUs that you have in stock that you would likely move regardless of if you gave that 30% off discount or not. Now, sometimes a 30% off discount may actually yield a higher incremental like return on ad spend adjusted for gross margin dollars. So like sometimes a promotion, despite the margin hit, can be outweighed by the ROAS gains, but many times it's not. So the benefit to these like up to sales are that when you run them, you essentially have the ability to have your pick. So let's say it's up to 50% off. You're probably going to pick the stuff that is heavily long in terms of how many days inventory you have and have a few items at 50% off. Maybe the middle of the pack is 30 and your top sellers are 10 or something along those lines. And what that allows you to do is it allows you to leverage really high click-through rates and conversion rates, most likely via your ad accounts and site, but control your margins to try to make sure that you have enough people purchasing the stuff you want to get rid of, but not too many, so you still have healthy margins and have the sell through on the units that are actually often more popular, and or you don't want to you don't want to discount so heavily. So that's like a very common conversation we'll have. Can kind of touch on the site merchandising stuff a bit more. There's also some ad account items, but on the site side, on your guys' side, what are you frequently chatting about when thinking about how you kind of structure your SKUs and how that gets placed across the site?
Dude, my mind was racing that whole time. I was trying to like listen deeply while not think about like the all the different directions we could take this. One thing that came to mind is like I get pushback all the time from brands about that like tiered discount strategy. I'm
I
not a
love that discount
marketer.
strategy.
Like I mean, I'm not a marketer. I'm thinking about the blended margin impact like you because I'm a CFO, right? So like
Yeah.
I'm thinking about like don't give away the farm on a SKU that's going to sell anyway, right? But I think the most common pushback that I get is I think that's going to be confusing to the consumer. I want to park that over here so we can chat about that in a second because I am very curious about like your perspective on that because I hear that all the time. But the other thing in terms of like for us on the CFO side of the world at Free to Grow, the most common scenario is like we have overstocked inventory positions in certain categories or certain SKUs, just like what you were mentioning. And we've got a promotional event coming up. So like actually one of our mutual clients has this annual sale every year. And it's not during Black Friday. Black Friday is also another moment, right? Preparing for Black Friday, I would say is the other most frequent time we hear from brands like, okay, we're preparing for Black Friday. It's this moment when promotion is a thing in the space. So people are going to be looking for deals. And so it's like, how can we be a part of that moment in the marketplace, but also use it to our advantage to get rid of inventory that we're overstocked on? So how can we go more heavy on the discount on those items that we need to move and right size inventory quantities of, and go, kind of less of a discount on the stuff that already moves? I would say as a general statement, we always try to help clients think through what is a discounting strategy that doesn't damage the perceived value of the brand, right? And one of the ways I think the tiered discount, in my opinion, it's not just like a site-wide discount on every single SKU, right? And again, if it's a part of this moment, like, the seasonal sale that happens every year, and they're not a brand that's just always doing promotions every single month, or like, Black Friday, to me, that doesn't damage the value perception in the marketplace. The other thing that we consider too, and it depends on the brand, depends on their inventory positions, is like a bundling discount strategy. Generally speaking, we believe that when you bundle, it doesn't damage the perceived value. It's like a give and a take. It's like, hey, you're going to give us something more, which is a higher AOV, purchase more. You're going to give us more value. We're going to give you some value in return. So I believe that, in my opinion, my take on it is that like your brand value gets diminished in the marketplace by discounts when you're just giving away discounts for no reason at all, right? That's what makes you in my opinion, like a discounting brand. But when there's an exchange of value, I don't believe that it has that same impact. So first off, do you agree about that? And then we'll come back to the like confusion or not
Yeah,
of the tier discount strategy.
I think it's very different for different types of different types of products. So like what you're describing is probably more often seen in CPG, like a buy more, save more. Certain types of products, you're going to have a harder time getting people to buy like three or four of. But
Totally.
certain types of products, you can just more naturally have that occur. And I think that like, I totally agree from like a risk standpoint on the perception side, having people buy more, save more of a consumable. I think people understand, especially with like even like shipping, like one of the reasons why you can often do buy more, save more is depending on what you're selling. Sometimes it just doesn't cost like a linear amount of money to keep on adding in more product to the orders you're shipping. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But like, I think consumers generally understand the premise of if you buy in bulk, you can get better deals. So I don't think it's necessarily like riskier there. And it's a very common strategy. And that's like an up to X% off strategy that is kind of built around bundling.
Totally.
When it comes to like a clothing and apparel instance, or like another category where you're not just buying more of the same thing, but you're buying like a larger quantity or variety of items, I don't really find the it's going to be confusing to customers argument valid. It could be, but there's ways to make it very, very clear to the customer as to what you're actually purchasing and what discount you may be getting.
I was going to ask you about that. Can you clarify a little bit more? Like, what are some of the ways, from your perspective, what are some of the kind of best practices to think about following to roll
Yeah,
that out in a
so
way that's not confusing?
so if you're running an up to this type of promotion is probably one of the hardest promotions to run because there's a lot of moving parts and it's not just set and forget. But if you are running an up to X% off sale, let us use up to 50% off, you're probably going to end up driving customers to a collection page where they can then see a variety of products that are either 50% off, maybe 30% off, maybe 10% off. And what we found in our experience is let's say you have a collection page with like 3 to 4 SKUs horizontally by like, and then you just scroll vertically. You want to make sure that on that first page of the collection page, you have like one highly discounted item, 50% off in this scenario, every 1 to 2 lines to make sure that customers feel like there are those 50% off offers on the site in the actual image, in the preview image on the collection page, adding a tag that says what the discount is. So they may see a bunch of SKUs, they see some 10s, some 30s, some 50s, but key thing is there are enough fees that people feel like there are those options to buy at 50% off. But maybe they are some of your broken sizes because you're just trying to move through like the units that are really hard to move through and or you're really long on them. And ideally what actually happens is if people do buy them, maybe they're also buying one of the items that are 10% off because they actually are the popular items that people want anyways. So, and then you kind of have to like break it out by channel. So like that's kind of the site is like collection page, show the variety of discounts, make it clear on the collection page what the discount is by SKU if you're running slash pricing, which slash pricing should probably be used if you're going to run it up to X% off sale. And then you have to think about it from a channel standpoint. So when you run ads, whether you say 50% off or up to 50% off, in our experience, you may be surprised at how little of a difference that makes to your click-through rates and then your eventual cost of getting traffic to the site. Because whether consumers read 50% off or up to 50% off, they're still going to be thinking, oh, I may be able to get 50% off. And that's not to say that 50 won't perform better, but what I'm saying is it may not perform as that much better depending on your brand. Again, every brand is different, so got to take it all with a grain of salt. But like
Yeah.
generally on the ad side, you can get the same effect in terms of improvements on click-through rate and without having to necessarily give everybody 50% off everything they buy, which is probably not going to be economically viable. So on the ad side, these up to sales are amazing a lot of the time for many brands. On the email and SMS side, there's a little bit more risk involved because if you, depending on like what you actually offer, your return customer base may be more trained on like wanting to buy specific items, or maybe you've run this two or three, maybe you've run this sale twice in the last year, and they've kind of learned that a lot of the most popular items are never actually that like highest discount. So when you run those types of sales to that type of customer or prospective customer, you have to be a little bit more strategic about what you also kind of layer in. Like maybe you're doing like limited time drops in the middle of the sale. Maybe you're at least making sure some of the popular items are 30% off and not 10% off. So there is that strong incentive there. That this is like the ultimate kind of practice of making sure you merchandise properly, not just for that first time customer return, but also making sure there's enough there to get your return customers excited. And this is the beauty of the up to 50% off sales is like you can merchandise as the sale's going on. So you may have something on like the fourth page of the collection page that almost no one's seeing that you can have in your back pocket. If you're like V1 of the collection page layout is not working great, mid-sale, I'm going to take some of those more heavily discounted items, move them up the rank, and see if I can get return customers to go. Or maybe I'm selling way too much of this stuff at 50% off, even though I kind of want to move it. If the blended average isn't healthy enough, maybe I gotta re-merchandise my page. So some of the stuff that's 50% off, instead of having 50% off on every single line, I'm gonna go and put it on collection page 2, 3, 4, etc., and adjust in real time. So there's a lot of different approaches to this, but I do think it's harder to execute. But if you can execute it well, it's often going to be one of the most powerful sales slash merchandising strategies you can run.
Yeah, that is that's fascinating. So one thing that just kept popping in my head as you were talking through this is the slash pricing data problem on Shopify with measuring gross revenue and discounts. So this will be a fun marketing slash finance conversation. You and I have talked about this before, I think with one of our mutual clients, but there's this quirk with Shopify data where when you do a slash through price as opposed to a discount code, when you go on Shopify and you look at gross revenue, what Shopify calls gross revenue, and you look at discounts, that the difference between the original price and the slash through price doesn't show up on the discounts line like it does for a discount code, right? And so your gross revenue actually has the slash price discount baked into it, which, you know, for the way that you guys at Aplo and the way we at Free to Grow run our financial models, you know, we believe that the right way to basically drive most variable costs is as a percentage of gross revenue, because you can toggle discounts up and down, right? And refunds can go up and down depending on seasonality and sales volume, and that can toggle the percentage that variable costs are of net revenue up and down. And so there's always a challenge with getting gross revenue right to drive variable costs properly in our financial models. What are the, you know, what do you guys do over there at Aplo to try to drive your P&L calculation, your P&L impact calculation as accurate as possible? Keeping in mind, it's never perfect because you don't know the blended discount for sure that you're going to hit, right? But what's the approach that you guys take?
Yeah, so there's an app. I'm trying to find it as we're chatting about it. There's one app that can sometimes solve this issue, but I think it's expensive. But we will.
Because they're the only ones who've got it figured out, man.
So like for some stores, you have to start like building in some of your assumptions and inputs that you use for your forecasts based off of the previous times you've run a promo. So that means like for a specific month, you're gonna, let's say I don't know, it's already April. Well, we're chatting in April, and let's say we're forecasting May. And last May we ran the same sale, or maybe last February we ran the same sale. We're running it again in May. You can at least like outline some expectation of what it's going to look like based off of the last time you ran that sale and how many days of that month you ran the sale compared to this month as like an initial expectation. If you wanted to like get a little bit more complicated, you could also start looking at like costs as a dollar value per unit sold instead of just like a blended variable percentage of gross sales. And if possible, that's great. So it kind of just goes back to like you probably can't have the exact same approach to every single store, and it depends on your unique makeup. I believe there are apps out there that basically allow you to run slash pricing with a automatic discount code. And the way it works is basically you have a slash pricing shown on your page, but when you get to checkout, it actually shows up as a discount code and you can get around it. But then the question is the cost of the app worth it for two things? One benefit there is you get more clean reporting. And I think that's harder to justify because you could always make the argument, like, especially at a lot of scale, is it just more cost effective to do like the labor instead of just having it be like cleanly filtered from the start? One of the most common complaints with slash pricing is that when you run slash pricing, by default, you can still apply most often discount codes on top of slash pricing. And that's where things get difficult with slash pricing. So you then kind of have people double dipping. So what are you doing with discount codes during that time? Or are you just doing your slash pricing in a way where you're assuming that there's still some redemption rate for discount codes. So that's kind of like how we would think about it, and then maybe some other considerations with running slash pricing.
I love it. I love it. So I want to turn our discussion to chatting a little bit more specifically about financial statement impact of some of these merchandising strategies that we've talked about here. One thing, one kind of bullet point that we had prepared beforehand was why sometimes MER or contribution margin is not the only North Star metric when you're running some of these sales. And so there's one case that I wanted to bring up to get us started. It's an extreme case, but it illustrates that there's a spectrum, right? That you have to look across a spectrum at the P&L and cash flow impact that you want this sale to have. It's not one or the other, right? If you optimize for one, you can get yourself in trouble, especially like just think about it. If part of the strategy, like we've been talking about this whole time, is to get rid of SKUs that you have an overstocked inventory position on, that's a balance sheet problem, right? That's not just, it does drive P&L costs in the form of carrying costs, inventory carrying costs, but it's mostly a balance sheet problem. It's driving your inventory days up, which is driving your cash conversion cycle up, which basically means your cash is tied up in inventory, right? And so this extreme case I want to start this discussion with is that sometimes, and I've had to do this a few times, when you're really overstocked on an inventory position, and let's say there's risk of obsolescence, or maybe it's not permanent obsolescence, but it's seasonal obsolescence. That happens a lot of time in apparel, right? That like you've got a product that is, the season is about to turn, and so that cold weather stuff that you have an overstock position in, no one's going to buy it for 12 months. No one's going to buy that even on heavy discount during the summer or the spring. So you're literally going to be holding on to it, right? And so in some of these extreme cases where you really need to move inventory, there is a strategy that financially makes sense to sell at a P&L loss or a contribution margin loss, but a cash flow gain. And so that sounds crazy. Every time I bring this up to founders, they're like, what are you talking about? How the heck can I possibly sell at a contribution margin dollar loss, but a cash flow gain? It's because if you've already purchased the inventory, which is the landed cost, right? And you've already outlaid that, that's already out of your bank account. That's a cost you've already incurred. If you're going to draw down an inventory position, right, at a contribution margin dollar loss, and you're going to keep it small and right sized or smaller, right? And you're not going to draw it back up. There is a case to sell at a contribution margin dollar loss where you lose money when you take net revenue minus landed product costs, minus shipping and fulfillment, minus credit card fees, minus ad spend, but you recover the landed product cost, the cost of goods sold that you've already outlaid, right? And if you're not going to outlay all of that again to draw that inventory position back up to an overstocked inventory position, and instead you're going to permanently keep it smaller, that can actually add cash flow into your bank account, right? By selling at a contribution margin dollar loss and a cash flow gain. It is an extreme case. You shouldn't do it unless you really need to liquidate a given inventory position and you don't plan on drawing it back up. It works best if you're coming out with a new version or there's a seasonal shift in demand where you're not going to be able to sell that for 12 plus months. But it is something, so that's at like one far end of the spectrum. Do you guys ever see that, Dylan, or is there another analogous scenario you can think of where MER or contribution margin is not the North Star for a given merchandising situation?
Yeah, well, there are definitely scenarios where it makes sense. What the general workflow we use at Aplo is like if there's an overstock, like first do the majority of the efforts to trying to fix that issue via email and SMS and high discounting, because normally you can at least have higher margins there. Usually, if there's an overstock issue, it's probably not a product that does great on ads, so fixing it with ads can be difficult, but it can also be an option. That's another example of like when you may want to run like some sort of like up to sale to try and get more traffic and more eyeballs on some of the lower less popular products. Another example is also just like there's so many examples of these, but it's kind of like a timely one. Is one store that I have in mind has a variety of products with different seasonal trends. And one set of products kind of is a very like holiday centric product, and kind of does okay the rest of the year, maybe it can acquire customers at break even. And then the other one is a very like cold time of year seasonal product, but arguably a better acquisition product 12 months of the year. And one of the products, have a good healthy inventory position in to the point where they're almost overstocked, the one where you can maybe break even. The other product where you can produce profit, the inventory position is not great, but it's not bad. And with the tariff situation that has come on, they've basically decided that they want to try to preserve their inventory of the higher efficiency product, even though it does better, assuming that come the fall, it is going to sell even more efficiently and opting to move the units that they're long on closer to break even currently. So the point I'm trying to make is basically that this brand kind of looked at their business with the reality of tariffs at the moment and basically said, I want to preserve some of the inventory that I don't want to sell through because it will really hurt me if I try to repurchase this specific type of unit and save my stock for when I can get the most profit per unit sold come the fall. And I'm going to purposefully have a worse P&L in the short term, or most likely have a worse P&L in the short term to move through these units that I'm overstocked on. And quite frankly, even if I do sell out, I don't really care as much to reorder because they're not going to be as seasonally in 3, 4, 5 months from now. So there are these scenarios that pop up, and I'm just giving the tariff example because obviously it's like top of mind for a lot of brands right now. But there are other times where this could happen as well for different types of products, depending on where you're sourcing from and what your overstock situation looks like. Like maybe there's only a certain time of year you can even move certain units if they're seasonal. So sometimes moving them at break even or a slight loss is actually a financially good decision if it allows you to have more capital to kind of make the bigger bets on the stuff that you think is going to have a higher return on investment.
It's funny that you just said that because I just wrote down in my notes what I wanted to say next, which is let's put our investor cap on here, right? Because at the end of the day, a good CFO is your chief capital allocator. And when you're allocating capital, it's all about putting your investor hat on, right? And so let's remind ourselves of a couple things like what are the core kind of conceptual foundations of capital allocation and like investing mindset. One, time value of money, that $1 today is worth more than $1 tomorrow. And the second one is capital is constrained and there's a trade-off. So every dollar that you invest somewhere, there's a trade-off because you can't invest many somewhere else. What we're talking about here, going back to my example of like, hey, you're going to draw that inventory position and you're not going to draw it back up. What I'm saying from an inventory standpoint is that what I'm saying from an investor standpoint is there are times as an investor when you have to cut your losses because your capital is not being used at the highest potential return, right? And so what you do is you liquidate your position as effectively as you can, but you redeploy it somewhere where there's a higher return. So hear that clearly. We don't liquidate low return capital positions or investment positions and redeploy them in the same low return investment positions again. We reallocate them to higher return uses. And so that's the name of the game here. And in fact, that's actually been the name of the game this whole conversation, right? Is that like we're ultimately looking to redeploy capital from a lower return investment to a higher return investment. So like if there's one thing you can take away from this episode from a financial standpoint, it's that. And the other thing I wanted to mention is, and you touched on this a little bit, is that repeat purchase velocity matters in all of this. It changes the game. If this is a one-time purchase product, right? Versus you just got a little bit out over your skis on inventory position of something that has like a repeat purchase frequency and you're having strong retention, totally different ball game. Like, let's actually turn the conversation to that a little bit because that happens. You might be selling a consumable, supplement, cosmetics, whatever, skincare, and you just purchased a ton of inventory, but you're seeing overall strong retention, right? A healthy amount of repeat purchase frequency. Again, this depends on your P&L situation, your balance sheet situation, but there's a much higher likelihood that you might be able to get really aggressive right? And draw that inventory position down to something more manageable that impacts your cash conversion cycle in the right way, improves cash flow, but it actually in the long term results in like quite a much more profitable business because you've acquired a lot of customers at a lower discount or a higher discount. Dylan, do you agree? And what are some of the things you got to watch out for if you got a consumable product and you want to use this as like an acquisition strategy?
Yeah. Sometimes with like buy more, save more, especially if you're implementing a subscription variant or variable into it, there reaches a point where like you can incentivize someone so much that they buy so much on such a large discount and their subscription is too soon, and you actually will increase cancellations of your subscription if someone say their subscription renewal is a month later and they've used half of what they have purchased. Now, like there are strategies to kind of get around that, and some of those may include like being very proactive about getting people to delay their order, but also part of it is just like being realistic about how much you can kind of give away on order one, because there does reach a point where you're probably just selling too much to some people, especially on subscription. And that balance is hard to strike sometimes, because like if you're selling like a consumable, like are you selling it to one person, a couple, a family of four, five, six? Consumption rates can vary, and that's why it's also important to give some options on like how frequently subscriptions run. But sometimes, depending on how you kind of structure your kind of like default configurations, you can lead to overselling essentially on the volume side. So buy more, save more is great. Using discounts as an incentive structure to buy more is generally good, and especially to subscribe and save also generally good. But there are some extremes where it starts to become like counterproductive. But for the most part, like I think it's generally the right approach. I honestly think there's like relatively few instances or ways in which it can go poorly, assuming that the offer actually converts on ads.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. This is an interesting topic because this comes up most of the time. Like for most brands, this comes up at some point in time. You know, there are some brands who are just constantly killing it and chasing inventory, but I'd say that's more of the exception rather than the rule. And the rule is that at some point or another, you will reach a point running your brand where you have to think about trying to funnel demand towards specific SKUs because you're trying to reset inventory positions. I think that this discussion is really, really valuable for any founders out there listening, because Dylan got a lot into the weeds on some of the marketing tactics, best practices, things to watch out for. On the finance side, you know, we talked a lot about how to think about when to prioritize profit versus cash flow. And ultimately, remember, this is all about liquidating investment positions in inventory to redeploy capital at a higher return, because every brand has a constraint on the capital that's available at any point in time. The one other thing that we haven't talked about, and we won't get too much into this, we'll just spend a couple minutes on it and then we'll land the plane here, but that's using debt financing alongside this strategy. And that the reason why this comes to mind for me is like at Free to Grow CFO, one thing that we are almost always helping every brand we work with think through and execute on is bringing the right debt financing into play to help finance basically your inventory days, the number of days that you hold inventory on hand. So there's a couple of things I want to just call out for people to keep in mind. One, if you have an ABL, which is a line that gives you a percentage of your inventory value available to borrow against. This merchandising stuff is actually even more important to you because in your loan docs, there is it's called an age out clause, which says that inventory aged over a certain number of days gets removed from your eligibility and you can't borrow against that inventory. So keeping your inventory position healthy by SKU is important because it can actually reduce the amount that an ABL lender will lend you. Additionally, the other thing to think about here is that what I see oftentimes, Dylan, is that like, as you know, if you have a super overstocked inventory position, there's not a single promotion that's going to solve the problem. There's not a single ad account change that's going to solve the problem. It's really more of you're hacking away at it little at a time. I see it take usually 12 plus months to really reset a super long inventory position. And so debt is a key tool to bring in alongside, because if you have the right debt, not the wrong debt, if you have the right debt structured at the right payback period, it actually will kick out like the need to ultimately pay for that inventory in full via bringing in that financing, and it can buy you some extra time. So like there's a brand we work with, they were super long on inventory coming out of December 2023. I mean, they had like 2 years of inventory on hand. And the first thing we did before working on these kinds of like merchandising strategies is we refinanced their debt stack with two pieces of debt that basically kicked the can out 18 months. And it bought us 18 months to work on this inventory position. But as we whittled away the inventory, we paid the debt down incrementally alongside of it. So we were taking the debt down as we were whittling away the inventory position. Today, they're completely debt free. They're more profitable than they've ever been. They learned their lesson, and the owner's taking a bunch of cash out every month to pay himself in the form of distribution. So debt is an important tool alongside this as well. Any other final thoughts you have, Dylan, on this topic?
Yeah, final thought, and one that doesn't get as much attention sometimes, especially with stores that have a lot of SKUs, is like price testing. And that's like another part of merchandising is like if certain like even if you're trying to like impact, if you have similar SKUs and you're trying to impact how many people buy one over the other, sometimes that can also be a lever to pull. Especially if you're driving traffic to a collection page or or a home page or a non-product page, where you'll normally see more leakage between someone buying a different product than the one they see on the ads. Sometimes doing some price adjusting price on either one SKU and or multiple is a thing that goes kind of missed sometimes. So I think that's one piece of merchandising that again it takes time and there's sometimes like diminishing returns and you can run too many tests at once. But just one thing that kind of came to mind towards the end here. But I think we covered most of the main ones. So yeah, I mean nothing else comes to mind specifically, but I think it's a good call out. We've seen it time and time again at Aplo with like long lead times of like 1, 2. I think I've even seen close to 3 years. So not lead times, sell through times in terms of how many days inventory they have on hand. And it's a very difficult position to be in. So managing that is partially merchandising, but also like you said, how it impacts on the debt financing side. So very interesting.
Yep. So look, in summary here, everyone, don't forget, like the whole reason we have this podcast is because we're trying to dive deep into what it takes to scale a D2C brand, and we see that the intersection of finance, us at Free to Grow CFO and Aplo on the marketing side, the intersection of those two things is what allows brands to navigate challenging situations like what we've talked about here today in a much more sophisticated and effective manner. So this has been a great discussion, and I'm pumped for episode 5 coming at you all soon here.
Let's go. Thanks, John. Chat soon.